Okay, well, one issue related to the war is the issue of terrorism, and that we have to fight terrorism. And why don't each of you talk about what your view of is in the fight against terrorism? Philip?
The war against terrorism is a war against a tactic. Terrorism is a tactic that's used by desperate people when they can't do anything else. The people of Saudi Arabia have been under occupation by the United States for a number of years. The United States and Britain created the regime in Saudi Arabia. Most of the terrorists in 9/11 came from Saudi Arabia, angry at that regime. The U.S. has insisted on not being neutral and in being completely involved with every dictator in the Middle East. And so this is why people are desperate. If a country occupied the U.S. and installed an extremely unpopular and repressive regime in the U.S., there would be Americans who would be trying to blow up things in that country. This is why we have terror as a tactic against us. To say there's a war on terror it's very Orwellian, because it's not addressing the direct issue. Terror is a tactic. There's been terror since the beginning of time. There will always be terror. And so it's not saying what it really is. It's a war against Islam, created by our own religious fundamentalists and our own people who want economic hegemony over the world. Chrissy is half correct about oil. The oil is the issue, but the real issue is money. In 1971, the U.S. Did not have anything backing its dollar, so it made a deal with the Arab regimes. We will support you militarily if you recycle our dollars in New York. Okay. That's where the power is.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
The first civil right of every American is the right to stay alive. We are in a war, not a lawsuit. We don't read Miranda rights to non-uniformed combatants in an age when a nuclear suitcase can kill thousands inside of minutes. We are threatened now by a radical branch of Islam. Every innocent civilian, men, women, and children. For that reason, we have to deal with this not as armies facing each other, but, as they say, a protracted asymmetrical type of conflict which requires high technology, the use of surveillance. My opponent, Mrs. Pelosi, refuses to allow that type of surveillance. She wants permission. That endangers the lives of innocent people. We have a right to protect our lives. That's the first responsibility of government, and Mrs. Pelosi fails in that responsibility.
Okay, thank you. And Chrissy?
Well, I think that the actual definition of terrorism is the wanton targeting of women and children and civilians. And if that is the definition of terrorism, then the United States and Israel, as well as bin Laden et al., are all responsible for creating terrorism. We have, at the basis of our culture at this point, a culture of revenge. There was no reason that when we had 9/11 that we had to start bombing all over the world in order to feel better about ourselves or go after and hunt them down and hang them, and all the different ways that we expressed ourselves as a culture. I felt like we should have immediately, if someone could pull off an event of that magnitude, we needed to negotiate. We needed to figure out what was at the core of that, and we needed to figure out if they were that organized that we had a formidable opponent. But I think what's even more interesting, 37% of the American people do not even understand if 9/11 happened the way it was presented to us. And that was on one of the MSNBC shows today, that they said that 37% of the American people are not sure about what 9/11 really was. They do not buy the normal consensus reality around it, what the Chronicle and the Examiner and all the papers say. So obviously we don't have even a basis for many of the American people, what we're doing right now. So I think this war on terror at this point is a sham. And I also want to say about the fundamentalists, is the fundamentalist Muslims, the fundamental Christians, and the fundamental Jews are all fundamentally working together to make huge problems for the rest of the people in the world right now.